one of the things that, I don't know if you've ever heard that, the idea that talk about a teacher, what's the job of a teacher? Some people say the job of the teacher is to get the information on his or her notes to the notes of the students without using the head of either one. Well, a good teacher, in my opinion, and Paul kind of epitomizes it, gets you to the point of not only giving you information, but inspiring you to the point of saying, wait a second, he also mentioned this, he also mentioned this, he also mentioned this. I want to dig in. And then it becomes from going just to be taught to saying, now I want to learn even more. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping we're all getting out of here as we listen to Aubrey and we're hearing some of these wonderful connections and things like that. So she hit on some of the things. I'm going to try to avoid duplicating some of the things, but if I do, give me a little leeway. So what she was talking about is retaining wall. We talked about the Herodian stones and things like that. Remember how when we were at this Suleiman wall, and we talked about how why the wall was there and things like that, and then the reason we knew that those Hasmonean stones were there were from dated pottery and things like that. So then you had the Hasmonean stones, then you had what they think might have been Crusader stones, I believe, is kind of in between, and then you've got the Suleiman walls on the top on that same original line from what was Herod's palace going down. So now we've got this retaining wall, and as Aubrey said, the retaining wall was there in order to provide fill, in order to have that large area there, and ultimately where Solomon's temple was, until it was destroyed in, 586? Nothing remains of it. That was followed by the temple of Zerubbabel, and Ezra and Nehemiah talks about that. Nothing remains of that. And then after that, Herod's. Nothing remains of that. They're all gone. So we have this retaining wall. It's interesting when you go into finding out about how do you get a glimpse of what this all looked like, and what did the temple look like, and how do we get this information about what was up there and things like that. And Josephus is kind of the best source on there. It's Josephus, book 15 in chapter 11. It talks about the process that Herod went through when he wanted to do this. And he makes a speech to the Jews. Now, did the Jews like him? No, but he did some pretty great things. So he stands before the Jews, according to Josephus, and he makes this speech, and he basically says, this is a Chris Kelly paraphrase of it, but he says, I have done a lot of great things for you. And you know what? You can't deny the security I've given you and the things I've done for your protection, and everything's really good. And it's come upon me that I really need to do something in an effort to show my piety. And so I desire to, and he wants to be careful about how he words it, but he's ultimately saying he wants to rebuild the temple to its former stature. Because he talks about the temple built by Zerubbabel, and I think they give some mention in cubits, but I think it comes to be something like 90 feet difference. And he wants to bring it to its former glory and bring it up, and kind of recognizing that the people are not going to trust him. He says, well, and don't worry, I'm not going to tear this one down until I have all the materials and everything gathered. And I can't remember if it's Josephus or if it's another source that says there was 10,000 workers, and they trained 1,000 priests to be stonemasons and things like that to do the work of the temple as not to desecrate it. Now there's two dates that Josephus gives, depending on what source of Josephus you look in, for the rebuilding when Herod started it. In the War of the Jews, he says basically 15 BC. I mean, he doesn't word it that way, but he's 15 BC. In the Antiquities of the Jews, he gives 18 BC. One possible resolution on that is 15 BC they started bringing the materials. 18 BC they started the buildings. They're bringing the materials, and I believe in Josephus it says 1,000 cartloads. Does that ring a bell? I believe it was 1,000 cartloads. So there's a lot of stuff being brought here. And it's interesting, Josephus makes the comment that, the people rejoiced in the idea of what was going to be done, but they really didn't trust it. So there's that thing going on that was happening in that. So the bottom line is, though, he rebuilds the wall, and Aubrey was talking about the Hasmonean stones and the Herodian stones that we see there. But you see they're all up there too. There's some intermixed in there. That wasn't there. And the wall that goes, if you go that way and you see a wall, that wasn't there. and that's kind of setting up for Aubrey what she's going to talk on the temple steps, because that wasn't going to be there. And so if you looked this way, you would see the street. By the way, shops on both sides. And then at the top is the Royal Stoa. And the Royal Stoa, and this is where I'm talking about putting a nail in it, the Royal Stoa was also the economic center. And necessary in many ways, but also corrupt. So I mean, there's this contrast, and it's up there. Now, the question is, when? If Herod built this, and the record says that it took him a year and a half to rebuild the temple. A year and a half. Okay, what about the rest? You know, obviously there's retaining wall being built and things like that in order to handle it. But what about the rest? In 2011, there was some more excavation done. And that excavation, by the way, is this down here. And I had the chance to be here in 2012 when it was first being done, and Doug Coleman and I watched them carting the stuff out and got to walk through this. So the street didn't go up there, the street went down there. There's the sewer line and things like that. So that's the street going all the way down there. And when they dug in this area down there, they found, and I think you mentioned, a mikvah, a Jewish ritual bath, below the foundation stone of the retaining wall. So a house was there. It goes to this idea of rebuilding on the ruins. So there was a house there, and in that retaining wall, in that foundation point, they found a coin dated 17 to 18 AD. When did Herod die? 4 BC. 4 BC. 18 AD is the earliest that could have gone up. Herod has been long dead. And people would say, well, normally in the past they would see the Herodian stones and they'd say Herod built this, right? But Herod was dead. So it's this idea that it was continuing to be built in the genius and design of Herod. So it kept going up, but long after his death. And if you read Josephus, and I'd really encourage you to read at least book 15 on that, it talks about the colonnades, and the columns, that went off to the Royal Stoa, and he says that 3 men could stand abreast in order to be able to meet hand in hand around a column. That's how massive it was. He talks about the size of it and the Corinthian decorations. It was really beautiful. This whole thing was designed to be the biggest building in the world. Better than anything Rome had done. The biggest building. Get back to our dates. 18 AD is the starting point. When did Jesus come in? 30, 31, 32, 33 AD, somewhere around there. And John records, and by the way, and I think Aubrey might have made mention of this earlier, John is not, he's not chronological. He starts at, I think, the 2nd chapter. He starts the 2nd chapter talking about what Aubrey mentioned from Mark, about the overturning of the stone. So here we've got it. This is 18 AD, and there's a trick. Well, let me get to the verse, so that might be helpful. John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting exchanging money. So he made a whip of cords and drove out them all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get out of here. How dare you make my father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Then the Jews demanded of him, "What miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will rise it up again in 3 days." And the Jews replied, this is a key statement, the Jews replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. So if we consider that timeline, AD for the starting, 33 AD around, Jesus comes in there, into this beautiful, most beautiful building. I mean, the pride of Israel. And it's probably still in construction. Matter of fact, I found one source that said in all it took 63 years till AD 63 to be totally completed. And Jesus comes in there and says, destroy it and I'll raise it up in 3 days. And they're going, destroy it? It's not even done yet. And you're going to say, destroy it? Because they're both thinking on different planes, weren't they? It goes to kind of what Wayne was talking about. They saw one thing, Jesus sees another. And so the audacity of this person to make that statement was something that they had so much pride in, things like that. And Jesus was talking about something different, when he would die and then he would rise up. And I can't remember if it was Aubrey or Wayne that shared it. Remember the verse Matthew 24 where the disciples were saying, look at all these beautiful, isn't this great? Aren't we really worthy of something? This is incredible. So their mindset was the same way. And you almost got to believe that when Jesus said that, although they said zeal for my house would consume me, that maybe wasn't necessarily a positive statement. And it's kind of like, uh-oh, he's getting off a little bit on the edge here. But then, when the resurrection came, then the connection happened. So think about that when you think about, if you've got a sermon or a Sunday school class about it, it's just not that he came in and tore up some things and people said, oh, you can't do that, that's not a nice thing. He was actually striking them at their very center of their existence. This massive 10,000 workers, 1,000 priests to do just that one part, 46 years, then go even one step further. When did the temple get destroyed? AD 70. If it took till AD 63 to really complete it, it didn't have much of a life. And Jesus was saying, you know what, there's a greater life, an eternal life, that's so much more important and so much more worthy, and it's in Jesus Christ. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And that's one example of how archaeology does not make the word come alive, but I would suggest that it makes the teaching come alive. Because suddenly there's a lot more to that simple story than just, oh, he tore up some tables.